Welcome back, students. Now we come to the next topic, that is discovering the Harappan civilization. How the Harappan civilization was found, and what do we know about this Harappan civilization, and which were the important persons related to the discovery of Harappan civilization. So now we come to this line, how archaeologists discovered the civilization. You can circle this sentence, how archaeologists discovered the civilization. Now, first of all, how did people come to know about such civilization really existed? So, underline people, then leave the next line, come to this line. Living in the area millennia later, they did not know what to make of the strange artifacts that occasionally surfaced, washed by floods, or exposed by soil erosion, or turned up while plugging a field or digging for treasure. So, after the Harappan civilization had declined, after many years, people living in that same area started to find strange artifacts, that is, shells, bricks, seals, and this came on the surface of the earth through when the area was washed by floods or exposed due to soil erosion, or when the plugging or digging was taking place of the soil. Now we come to Cunningham's confusion. So what, as we had studied earlier in the chapter, Cunningham was the first Director General of ASI. So what was his confusion? How did he miss the Harappan civilization theory? So first point, Cunningham, the first Director General of ASI, began archaeological excavations. Next line, preferred to use the written words, texts as a guide to investigations. This is the first point. The first point is trying to say that Cunningham, who was the first Director General of ASI, that is Archaeological Survey of India, he preferred whatever there was finds, whatever excavations were taking place, all these finds, what he preferred, that he matched them with written records, if it is in books, forms of books, or in the form of inscription. Next point. Cunningham's main interest was in the archaeology of the early historic 6th century BC to 4th century CE and later period. So what Cunningham's main idea, the focus was only from 6th century BCE, that is after 1500 years after the Harappan civilization had declined. So he was focusing on later years. Next point. He used the accounts left by Chinese Buddhist pilgrims who had visited the subcontinent before the 4th and the 7th century CE to locate early settlements. Now another thing, he only believed accounts left by the Chinese Buddhist pilgrims such as Fian, Huansang, who had visited India, and these Chinese pilgrims had visited India from the 4th and the 7th century CE. So what he thought, that if anything will be found in Chinese record, then only we can believe that. And these Chinese pilgrims visited India after 2000 years after the decline of Harappan civilization. Next point, next paragraph, a site like Harappa, which was not part of the eternity of Chinese pilgrim, was not known as an early historic city, did not fit very neatly within his framework of investigation. So what he was investigating, it did not fit in the same period of the Chinese pilgrim, because Chinese pilgrims never had any knowledge about the Harappan civilization, as they came after 2500 years after the decline of the Harappan civilization. So they did not mention that in their text, and thus Cunningham was not fitting the area time period of the Harappan civilization with the Chinese text. Next point. So although Harappan artifacts were found fairly often during the 19th century, some of these reached Cunningham. He did not realize how old they were. So it is clear now that these artifacts reached him also. He studied them also, but he could not realize how old they were and in which time period or time frame were these artifacts of the Harappan civilization. Next point, come to next paragraph. He, like many others, thought that the Indian history began with the first cities in the Ganga Valley. Given his specific focus, it is not surprising that he missed the significance of Harappa. Now, many a times on this sentence, questions are given that how did Cunningham miss the significance of Harappa? So, out here it is trying to say that all the historians, mostly European historians, they had a belief that the Indian history starts from the spread the cities in the Ganga Valley, that is around 2500 years from now, whereas the Harappan civilization was much older, approximately 5000 years older. So they did not realize how important the Harappan civilization was or the artifacts were, and they just considered their investigation on the basis of the Chinese pilgrims' texts and the inscriptions they had found. Now we come to the next subtopic, a new old civilization. Now another person after Cunningham is John Marshall. So we'll be studying about in this subtopic about John Marshall and his contribution. First point, seals were discovered at Harappa by archaeologist Dayaram Sahani. Come to next line, in layers that were definitely much older than the early historic levels. So the excavations conducted at Harappan site were under Dayaram Sahani, and he had discovered many layers of the different levels of the Harappan civilization. Come to next point, Rakhal Das Banerjee found similar seals at Mohenjo-daro, leading to the conjecture that these sites were part of a single archaeological culture. Now, Dayaram Sahani, he conducted excavations at Harappa. Rakhal Das Banerjee, he conducted similar kind of excavations at Mohenjo-daro, and these both places found the artifacts almost of the similar shapes, size and same condition and in the same time period. Based on these finds, in 1924, John Marshall, Director General of ASI, announced the discovery of a new civilization in the Indus Valley to the world. So now during this period, the Director General of ASI is John Marshall, and on the finds of Dayaram Sahani at Harappa and Rakhal Das Banerjee at Mohenjo-daro, and after studying all these archaeological finds, in 1924, John Marshall declared to the world that there is a new civilization in India, and that civilization name he named as Indus Valley Civilization to the world. Next point. As S.N. Roy noted in The Story of Indian Archaeology, Marshall left India 3000 years older than he had found her. Now many a times questions are asked on this statement of S.N. Roy. So we need to explain that how did Marshall leave India 3000 years older than he had found her. When Marshall came to India, the feeling was that the Indian history begins from the cities in the Ganga Valley. That is the period from the 5th century BCE. That is 2500 years from now. But when he discovered the Harappan civilization or the Indus Valley civilization, and he declared to the world that the Indus Valley civilization, there is a civilization buried under the surface, and there are sites such as Harappa, Mohenjo-daro which are having similar characteristics, and this civilization on the banks of river Indus. So this civilization was 5000 years from now onwards. So he left India 3000 years older than what he had found. So we have to explain this, all these points to give the answer on this statement. Now we come to the next paragraph. John Marshall, leave out S. John Marshall, come to next, leave the next line, come to the next line, was the first professional archaeologist to work in India and brought his experience of working in Greece and Crete to the field. till here. Now, John Marshall was the first. He was a professional archaeologist. Professional means that he had a very vast knowledge in this field, and this knowledge he had gained in Greece civilization as well as Crete civilization. So when he came to India, he had vast knowledge with him, and this helped him to discover the Indus Valley civilization. Now, next point, Marshall tended to excavate along regular horizontal units, measured uniformly throughout the mount, ignoring the stratigraphy of the site. This point. Next point. This meant that all the artifacts recovered from the same unit were grouped together, even if they were found at different stratigraphic layers. Next point. As a result, valuable, come to next page, information about the context of these finds was irretrievably lost. Now I'll explain you this. What happens? Marshall made one big mistake. Now what is happening, that all the artifacts which were found at Harappan sites, in different various sites of the Harappan civilization, okay, and vertically and horizontally, whereas what is happening, the artifacts which were buried lower in the ground, they were from the older time, and which were artifacts which were found on top were from the latest period. And what happened, that all these artifacts during the time of John Marshall, they were collected without keeping in view that this was found at a lower level and this was found at an upper level. All these artifacts were collected together and sent to the ASI, that is Archaeological Survey of India, to study. So what is happening, that all these artifacts were mixed together, whereas there used to be a time period between all these, that a artifact which was found at a lower level in the ground may be much older, whereas a artifact which was found on the top layer would be of a latest period. So this is what mistake John Marshall made, and he missed the stratigraphic layers of all different sites. Now to understand this, what is this stratigraphy? We'll come here. Sites, mounds, layers. First point, archaeological sites are formed through the production, use and discarding of materials and structures, and reuse of the landscape results in the build-up of occasional debris called a mound. Brief or permanent abandonment result in alteration of the landscape by wind or water activity and erosion. So now what is happening, archaeologists, they come to a site and start digging and trying to find about what is there in these materials. They are digging, and when they are digging, they are collecting a lot of material, and this material which they recognize as waste material is collected as debris, and it is collected and it forms a small mound. Mound means a small higher portion on the ground, and from this, now what is happening, it changes the full landscape, and by wind and water activities and erosions taking place, it alters the landscape totally, the site totally, and later on studies show that this becomes a very big factor for later archaeologists when they are facing problems to study that civilization in a better way. Now coming to the next point, the lowest layers are the oldest and the highest are the most recent. The study of these layers is called stratigraphy. Next point, artifacts found in layers can be assigned to specific culture periods and thus can provide the cultural sequence for a site. So this is what actually John Marshall missed. Now we come to the next topic, subtopic, that is new techniques and questions. So now when John Marshall had made a mistake of not studying different layers of sites, this problem was solved by which person? Now we come to next subtopic. R.E.M. Wheeler took over as Director General of the ASI in 1944. Next point, Wheeler recognized that it was necessary to follow the stratigraphy of the mound rather than dig mechanically along uniform horizontal lines. So he understood that different artifacts found in different positions are from different time periods. So he followed this stratigraphy pattern. Next point, come to next paragraph. With the partition of the subcontinent and the creation of Pakistan, the major sites are now in Pakistan territory. So with partition, all the major sites went to Pakistan. Next point, this has spurred Indian archaeologists to try and locate sites in India. So this has made study of Harappan civilization more important for the Indian archaeologists because they are trying to find and locate sites in India. Next point, an extensive survey in Kutch. Come to next line, Punjab and Haryana have added to the list of Harappan sites, while Kalibanga, Lothal, Rakhigadi, and most recently Dholavira has been discovered. Fresh explorations continue. So these all places, Kalibanga, Lothal, Rakhigadi, and recently Dholavira, are after independence of India. Next point, over the decades, new issues have assumed importance. Next paragraph. Since the 1980s, there has also been growing international interest in Harappan archaeology. All the archaeologists of the world are taking a lot of interest after 1980s in the Harappan civilization. They want to know what is actually the Harappan civilization, what kind of culture it is there. They are using modern scientific techniques including surface exploration to recover traces of clay, stone, metal and plant and animal remains, as well as to minutely analyze every scrap of available evidence. Next point, these explorations promise to yield interesting results in the future. So in the near future we will be having a totally a new concept, new theory on the Harappan civilization on the recent archaeological surveys being conducted from various international archaeologists.